Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to welcome the opportunity for this debate. I mean, there's many things that we could speak on, in the context of this bill. I mean, I still feel that we haven't had a proper debate on energy security. In this country, we haven't had a proper debate on things like fracking, on nuclear energy, and I think it is an appropriate time for us to embark upon that and to really look into the future as to where we're going with these important issues. But insofar as the bill is concerned, I'm going to stick to the points in the legislation for this debate that we're having this evening. I mean, I think to say that the bill only has vague aspirations, as members of Fianna Fáil and the Green Party would claim, I think that's complete nonsense. They didn't prioritise this legislation when they were in government and coalition, and so it wasn't adopted and they failed. In their coalition, could they have done better? Well, I think it's a historical fact that they did worse. In the Green Party's central piece of legislation, the reason for being in government was brought in when the Green Party had already announced that they were leaving government, and when they knew that their legislation couldn't get through the Seanad because Fianna Fáil didn't support it. So it arrived too late. It had no chance of being adopted. It was dead on arrival. And so when I hear the Green Party and I hear the Fianna Fáil Party giving out about this legislation and that we have it now, I think it's rank hypocrisy. And it really angers me as someone who, since I was first elected to Dublin City Council, has cared about environmental issues. I mean, I was, a young member of Greenpeace. I had the pencil case when I was in school. It's something a lot of us care about. So if we're going to have a debate on the environment, if we're going to have a debate on the climate change bill that's here in front of us, let's have a constructive one. And let's not try and politically point score over things that we couldn't do when we were in power. And I'm talking by we there what Fianna Fáil or how Fianna Fáil and the Green Party address it, claiming that they could have done more is absolute nonsense. I think the government's making a start with this. I think it's taking a good initiative, and so it's a good thing, but I do think it's only a start. I think the important thing really is to get something in place and then build upon it. Get that first piece of legislation from which then we can aspire to so many of the things that a lot of people want to see. I mean, we've all met with very passionate and very dedicated campaigners for climate justice, for climate action. And I think a lot of us would share their aspirations for what the legislation should have. But I do think we need to recognise that we're starting here, and we are starting in a good place. If you look at something like the establishment of the Advisory Council, that's a good thing. It's going to be able to produce its own reports. Previous legislation wouldn't have allowed for that if it had been enacted, so that's a positive step. We're going to have an action plan every 5 years. Which is another positive. There's going to be an obligation on ministers every year to come in and report on how they're making progress in their own areas. So, I think that's a positive foundation for where we want to begin this conversation. But we have to recognise as well that the legislation that we have in front of us is imperfect. So, in addition to building upon it once it's adopted, we can actually do a lot of work between now and it being adopted to make sure that it is a strong enough foundation as possible for the coming years. And I hope the Minister will approach the legislation in the proper spirit as we come through the committee stage, because if we look back to the Oireachtas Committee's report, we see actually that most of what it recommended wasn't reflected in the legislation. And if you're not going to listen to a committee, I mean, you don't have to agree with everything that it says, but if you're not going to listen to it, it begs the question why we have these committees and why they do the work that they do. And so I think it's important, as we amend the legislation coming through committee stage, that we try and find a better balance between what the Oireachtas Committee recommended and what the government wants, because that's the whole purpose of the system that we have. On the issue of targets being built into the legislation beyond 2020, this definitely needs to be better explained. I think if we're not building in targets up to 2050, and if it's standard practice in other European countries to do so, then we need to know why we're not doing it here. I think that needs to be a really robust explanation. And if there's a legitimate reason in terms of agriculture or in terms of sustainable food production, then let's hear it, let's have that debate. But let's not be closed to the possibility until we've had that debate thoroughly through the House as the legislation moves through it. There is no definition of low carbon in the bill, which is incredible really when you think about it. We have a definition of low carbon. The bill's about low carbon, so the definition should definitely be in there. And I think that's something simple that we could agree to include as we come to committee stage. There's also no concept of climate justice in the bill, which is remarkable, because you can't talk about this without talking about climate justice. I mean, it's an important concept. It's a difficult thing to actually try and achieve, but you're not going to get anywhere near achieving it if you're not even talking about it in primary legislation like this. So I think we need to work on that at committee stage as well. In relation to the Expert Advisory Council, we need to make sure that it's properly independent. And if there's ways we can do that by adopting language relevant to the Fiscal Advisory Council, then let's do that. But it's also recognised that in setting up the Fiscal Advisory Council, we haven't we've created something imperfect there as well, because although it has independence, it can be ignored, and it is ignored. And we don't want to risk the new Expert Advisory Council becoming irrelevant. So it needs to have some sort of strong reporting mechanism, I think, into the Oireachtas in here, so that we can deliberate on its reports independently from the government, and that it reports in an appropriate timeline and in a short timeline, so that before decisions are made, we're actually discussing what the Expert Advisory Council is talking about, and that the government is then making decisions based on their advice, and not, as we've had so many times on important decisions, making the decision and getting the best advice afterwards. So just to conclude, Chair, I mean, I do welcome the fact that we've done this. I welcome the fact that we're here. The bill needs to be better. There's a lot of work to do, but I think if we approach it, get rid of the politics, get rid of the hypocrisy, and come with constructive solutions and constructive engagement, we'll get a very strong foundation and recognise that it is just the beginning as we move forward to 2020 and then on to 2050. Thank you.